There's a special kind of damage that doesn't come from the betrayal itself, but from realizing how long you were the only person in the room who didn't know what was happening. I didn't catch my girlfriend cheating through texts, screenshots, or some dramatic confrontation. I didn't snoop, didn't hire anyone, didn't follow her around looking for proof. I wasn't suspicious enough for that. I trusted her, fully, calmly, stupidly, if you want to use the word everyone else apparently already had. My name is Ethan. I'm 29, and at the time this happened, my girlfriend Maya was 27. We'd been together a little over 2.5 years, long enough that people had stopped asking if we were serious and started asking when we'd move in together permanently, get engaged, build something stable. I thought we already were. Maya was always social, friendly, the kind of person who could talk to anyone and make it feel effortless. I liked that about her. I'm not overly jealous, not controlling, not the type to monitor who my partner talks to. I've always believed that if you have to police someone to keep them faithful, the relationship is already dead. There was one guy, though. I'll call him Ryan. He was a coworker, or a friend, depending on the day, depending on how I asked. He existed in that familiar gray zone every betrayed person learns to hate in retrospect. He's just a friend. We work together a lot. You're being insecure. I would tell you if there was something to worry about. And every time I believed her. Not because I was weak, but because nothing about our relationship felt broken. We laughed, we slept together, we made plans. She held my hand in public. She talked about the future like I was clearly in it. That's what still messes with my head. Apparently, while all of that was happening, something else was happening too, and everyone knew. I found out by accident. A stupid, offhand comment at a small gathering. Someone laughed and said something like, "Oh, you didn't know?" in that casual tone people use when they assume you're already in on the joke. The room went quiet for just a second too long, and in that silence, everything clicked at once. The late nights, the defensiveness, the way Ryan's name always came up but never stayed, the looks I'd noticed but dismissed because I trusted her more than my instincts. When I confronted Maya, she broke down immediately. She cried, apologized, said it meant nothing, said she never wanted to hurt me, said she didn't think I'd find out like this, said she was confused, said she still loved me. What hurt the most wasn't even the cheating. It was realizing I was the last person to know. Friends knew, coworkers knew, random people apparently knew, and I walked around for who knows how long like everything was fine, smiling, trusting, defending her, while being quietly humiliated without my consent. That realization stays with you, because once you understand that, you stop asking why she cheated and start asking something worse. How many times did people look at me and think I was choosing to ignore it? And how long had I been the only one in the dark? After that night, nothing felt the same, even before anything was said out loud. Once you realize you're the last person to know, you start replaying memories with a different filter. Conversations you brushed off suddenly feel staged. Smiles feel rehearsed. Silence becomes loud. The next few days were the worst, not because of Maya, but because of everyone else. I started noticing the looks. At first I thought I was imagining it. A pause in conversation when I walked into a room, a quick glance exchanged between two people who didn't realize I was watching. Someone asking, "How are you holding up?" with a tone that made no sense yet. I wasn't holding up to anything, at least not officially. I met a friend for coffee, someone I'd known for years. We talked about work, sports, random stuff. Then there was this awkward gap, and he finally said, "Man, I didn't know if you knew or not." My stomach dropped. "Knew what?" I asked, even though I already did. He looked relieved and uncomfortable at the same time. "About Maya and Ryan. I thought you were aware." Aware. That word hit harder than any insult. I asked how long. He shrugged. A while. I mean, people assumed you were cool with it or something. Cool with it. I nodded, paid for my coffee, and walked out before my hands started shaking. I didn't yell. I didn't confront him. He wasn't the problem. He was just the confirmation. Over the next week, the truth leaked in from everywhere. A coworker admitted they'd seen Maya and Ryan at a bar months ago. A mutual friend said they'd stopped inviting me to certain gatherings because it felt awkward. Someone else said they didn't want to get involved. No one warned me. No one checked on me. No one thought I deserved the truth. They all assumed I either knew or didn't want to know. That assumption was humiliating. It made me feel small in a way cheating alone never could. Because cheating is between two people. Public humiliation is communal.
Meanwhile, Maya acted like nothing had changed. She texted me good morning, asked how my day was, complained about work, sent me memes. She even said, "You seem a little distant lately," like I was the one shifting the ground under us. When I finally confronted her properly, not in shock but with clarity, she didn't deny it. She collapsed, cried immediately, covered her face, said all the things people say when they're trying to outrun consequences. "It didn't mean anything. It just happened. I never wanted to hurt you. You're the one I love." I asked her one question. How long did everyone else know? She didn't answer right away. That pause told me everything. "I don't know," she said eventually. "I didn't ask." Of course she didn't. She told me I was overthinking the social part, that people exaggerate, that I shouldn't care what others think. But that was easy for her to say. She wasn't the one walking around unaware, defending her loyalty, trusting her completely while being silently pitied. She wasn't the one finding out he was the punchline of a joke he never agreed to be part of. That's when I understood something important. The cheating hurt, but the isolation hurt more. Because betrayal is bad enough when it's private. When it's public and you're the last to know, it changes how you see yourself. And once that shift happens, you don't just lose trust in your partner, you lose trust in the room. After the confrontation, nothing moved forward. That was the strangest part. There was no breakup scene, no final decision, no dramatic exit, just this suspended state where the truth was technically out, but everything else stayed exactly where it was, like a room after a storm where nothing has fallen yet, but the air feels wrong. Maya stayed with me. She cried less after the first day. Apologies turned quieter, more careful. She started acting gentle with me, like I was fragile glass, instead of a person who had just had his reality cracked open. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said more than once. "I just want us to be okay. Please don't let this define us." That last one stuck with me, because it already had. I didn't argue with her. I didn't interrogate her either. I just watched. And when you stop reacting, you start noticing things you missed before. She avoided specifics, always. If I asked about when it started, she answered with how she felt. If I asked why, she talked about stress, confusion, feeling unseen. If I asked about Ryan, she minimized him until he was practically a background character in his own affair. "It was never about him," she said. "It was about me being stupid. It could have been anyone." That answer was supposed to make me feel better. It didn't. It made me feel replaceable. At night, while she slept, I replayed everything. Conversations, moments, jokes, times she'd defended Ryan so fiercely that I'd ended up apologizing for even asking. "You're being paranoid. You need to trust me. I hate that you don't believe me." I remembered saying, "Okay, you're right," more times than I was comfortable with. Not because she forced me, because I wanted to be the kind of man who trusted. Now that trust felt weaponized. I started remembering moments where I'd been publicly humiliated without realizing it.
times when Ryan had been around and acted overly casual with me, friendly, almost smug, like he knew something I didn't. And he did. That knowledge sat in my chest like weight. I asked Maya again, later, quietly, "Did you ever think about telling me?" She hesitated. Again. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said. That sentence sounded different now. It didn't mean, "I care about you." It meant, "I didn't want to deal with your reaction." There's a difference. I started wondering how many people had watched me interact with her knowing the truth. How many smiles I'd returned that were actually pity. How many conversations I'd walked away from where people thought, he's choosing not to see it. That idea messed with my sense of self more than anything else. I've always thought of myself as perceptive, grounded, not naive, but suddenly I felt like I'd failed some invisible test of awareness everyone else had passed. Maya tried to compensate. More affection, more reassurance. She held my hand in public again, posted pictures of us online, tagged me, smiled loudly, like visibility could erase history. It didn't. It felt like damage control. One night she said, "Everyone cheats sometimes. It doesn't have to mean everything is broken." I didn't respond. Not because I was shocked, but because I realized she'd already normalized what she'd done. And once someone does that internally, they're no longer trying to rebuild trust. They're trying to lower the bar. I didn't know yet what I was going to do, but I knew something irreversible had already happened. I no longer felt safe being the only honest person in the room. And that realization doesn't fade. It sharpens.
What surprised me wasn't how fast the story spread. It was how long it had already been finished in everyone else's heads. Once I knew, people stopped pretending. They didn't announce it outright, but the tone changed. Invitations stopped coming with plus ones. Conversations became careful. People checked my face before mentioning names, places, events, like they were gauging how much truth I could handle. I ran into a couple we'd double dated with more than once. They hugged me a little too tightly and asked how I was doing, the way people do when something bad has already happened. I asked them directly, "How long did you know?" They exchanged a look, just a second, long enough. "Long enough," one of them said. "We thought you knew." That phrase again, "we thought you knew." Everyone thought I knew, which meant everyone thought I was either okay with it or too weak to confront it. Both options felt humiliating in different ways. I started hearing stories I hadn't asked for, little fragments people had kept to themselves because it was easier than being honest. They'd seen Maya and Ryan together at work events. They'd left parties together. They'd shared rides home. They'd been close in ways that didn't need explaining.
No one had proof they wanted to carry. No one wanted to be the bad guy. So instead, they let me be the fool. Maya didn't seem to understand this part at all. When I tried to explain how exposed I felt, how small it made me feel to know that my relationship had been public property without my knowledge, she waved it off. "You're focusing too much on other people," she said. "This is about us." But that wasn't true anymore. The moment everyone else knew, it stopped being private. The betrayal wasn't just something she did to me, it was something that happened around me, with witnesses who chose silence over decency. I started noticing how people treated her differently too. Less admiration, less warmth. Some avoided her altogether. Others watched her closely, like they were curious how she'd carry herself now that the secret was out. She hated that. Not the hurt she'd caused me, but the way the room no longer worked in her favor. One night she said, "I feel judged everywhere I go." I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse, I just said, "That's what it feels like when your life becomes a story you didn't get to tell yourself." She went quiet. For the first time, I think she understood a fraction of what I'd been sitting with. But it was too late, because something else had changed too. I stopped defending her. When people asked how we were doing, I didn't lie anymore. I didn't overshare, but I didn't cover for her either. I said, "We're dealing with things," and let the silence do the rest. That silence felt honest. And honesty, once you return to it, makes everything else feel unbearable. I wasn't angry yet. I was distancing myself, not physically, but emotionally, from the version of us that had required me to be unaware for it to function. I didn't know what the end would look like, but I knew I couldn't go back to being the only person in the room without the truth. And once you refuse that role, the relationship has already started ending, whether anyone admits it or not. By the time we reached what I think of as the middle of the end, Maya had stopped asking if we'd survive and started acting like survival was already agreed upon. That shift was subtle, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. She didn't apologize much anymore, not directly. Instead, she reframed. Every conversation bent toward context, circumstance, pressure. She talked about work stress, emotional confusion, how lonely she'd felt even with someone there. She spoke as if the cheating were a symptom of something abstract, not a series of decisions made repeatedly and deliberately. "I wasn't trying to replace you," she said one night, curled against me on the couch. "I just needed something different for a while." Different. As if I were a phase she'd outgrown temporarily. I asked her, calmly, not accusing, how it started. Not the emotional version, the practical one. She hesitated, then said, "It just sort of happened." I waited. Nothing else came. That answer used to work on me. It didn't anymore. What bothered me most wasn't that she minimized Ryan, it was that she minimized me. She talked as if I were this stable background feature of her life, something that would remain regardless of what she experimented with elsewhere. "You know I'd never leave you for him," she said at one point, like that was supposed to be comforting. I nodded, but inside something cracked, because what she was really saying was, "You'll always be here." And I started to understand how that assumption had shaped everything. She didn't cheat because she thought I'd forgive her. She cheated because she thought I was permanent. At the same time, people around us began treating me differently, not with cruelty, worse, with pity. Conversations softened, jokes stopped. Friends asked how I was doing instead of how we were doing. That separation mattered. It told me the relationship had already ended in everyone else's mind. Maya and I were the only ones still negotiating terms. She didn't like that. "You're letting people get in your head," she said once. "They don't know us like we do." But that wasn't true either. They knew something I hadn't. And now that I knew it too, pretending otherwise felt dishonest. One evening she said something that finally settled it for me. "If you really loved me," she said softly, "you wouldn't let one mistake erase everything." I didn't respond right away, because calling it a mistake was the final rewrite, the last attempt to shrink what she'd done until it fit inside a story where I was unreasonable for not moving on. What she didn't understand was that I wasn't stuck on the cheating anymore. I was stuck on the fact that everyone else had known. That she'd walked into rooms with me, held my hand, smiled at friends, knowing they saw me as the only person without the truth. That kind of humiliation doesn't fade because someone says they're sorry. It fades when you remove yourself from the situation entirely. I didn't say that to her. Instead, I asked one simple question. If I hadn't found out by accident, how long would you have let it continue? She looked at me, and for the first time, she didn't answer. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't fighting to save a relationship anymore. I was deciding how long I'd stay in a story where honesty had been optional and dignity had been negotiable.
After that question, the air between us changed. Not dramatically, no slammed doors, no shouting, just a slow cooling, like something left out too long. Maya seemed to sense it too. She became cautious again, less confident, more attentive, but it felt reactive, not sincere,
like someone adjusting their posture once they realize they're being watched. I started pulling back without announcing it. I stayed later at work, took longer walks, put space between us that didn't require explanation. I wasn't punishing her. I was testing what it felt like to not center my life around maintaining her comfort. It felt stable. She noticed, of course. "You're different," she said one evening, trying to sound casual. "You don't look at me the same." "I'm just tired," I replied. Not a lie, just incomplete. She tried harder after that. More affection, more reassurance. She'd bring up memories from early in our relationship, like nostalgia could anchor us back to a time before the truth existed. "Remember that trip we took? Remember how sure we were about each other?" I remembered all of it. That was the problem, because now those memories had a second layer, a quiet awareness of how easily certainty could coexist with deception, how convinced I'd been, even while the ground under me was already shifting. What finally surprised me was how little I missed her when she wasn't around. That realization landed gently but firmly. I missed the idea of us, the routine, the future I'd assumed was already written. But her presence itself, her voice, her touch, no longer felt essential. It felt optional. And once something becomes optional, it's already halfway gone. Friends started inviting me places again, alone this time. No awkward pauses, no careful wording, just normal conversations. I laughed more than I had in months, and that scared me a little. Not because joy felt wrong, but because it came so easily once I stepped out of the tension. Maya didn't like that. "You seem fine," she said one night, suspicion creeping into her tone. "Too fine." "I am fine," I said. She searched my face. "Are you thinking about leaving?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because saying it out loud would make it real. "I'm thinking about myself," I said instead. She cried then. Not loudly, quietly. The way people cry when they realize control is slipping. She told me she felt abandoned, that she'd made a mistake and was paying for it forever, that I was being unfair by withdrawing instead of forgiving. I listened. And in that moment, something became very clear. She wasn't afraid of losing me because she loved me. She was afraid of losing the version of me who stayed no matter what. That version was gone. I didn't make a decision that night. I didn't pack a bag or ask her to leave. I just went to sleep knowing that the ending had already started and that it wouldn't require drama to finish. Some relationships don't explode. They simply stop making sense. And once that happens, staying becomes harder than leaving. By the time I accepted that I was done, I realized something uncomfortable. Everyone else had already accepted it for me. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. Friends stopped asking if we'd work things out and started asking what my next move was. Conversations assumed separation without saying the word. People no longer spoke about Maya and me as a unit. It was just me now. And the strangest part? That didn't hurt. It felt accurate. Maya, on the other hand, sensed the change in the room before she accepted it in her head. She became restless, anxious, started oscillating between confidence and panic depending on the day. One morning she said, almost casually, "So, what are we doing?" The question landed heavier than she expected. "What do you mean?" I asked. She rolled her eyes slightly. "Us. Are we fixing this, or are we just pretending nothing happened?" I thought about all the chances she'd had to be honest before I found out, all the moments she could have stopped, confessed, chosen differently. "We're not pretending," I said. "We're just being honest about what already changed." She didn't like that answer. "You're acting like you're already gone," she snapped. I didn't raise my voice. "I am." That was the first time I said it out loud. She stared at me like she was waiting for me to take it back. "I said I was sorry," she said. "I said I'd do anything." "I know, but sorry doesn't rewind time, and anything doesn't include changing the part where everyone else knew before I did." That hit her. She sat down slowly, like her legs had stopped working. "I didn't mean for that to happen," she whispered. "I know," I said, "but it did, and I have to live with it. Every room I walk into, every person who looks at me, that is part of this now." She cried again, but it was different. Not defensive, not performative, just exhausted. "I didn't think you'd actually leave," she said. That sentence explained everything. She never believed there would be a real consequence, not because she thought I was weak, but because she thought I was safe, permanent, reliable in a way that made risk feel manageable. "I didn't plan to," I said honestly. "I just realized I couldn't stay." We talked for hours after that, not arguing, not negotiating, just laying out facts. What trust meant to me, what humiliation had done to my sense of self, how hard it was to rebuild something when the foundation was built on secrecy and public silence. She asked if there was anything she could say to change my mind. I thought about it. "No," I said finally. "Because anything you say now would be after the truth, not before it." The next day, I packed a bag. Not dramatically, just essentials. Clothes, laptop, a couple books. I left the apartment keys on the counter where she'd see them. She watched quietly from the doorway. No yelling, no begging, just the sound of something ending exactly the way it had been living. Quietly, with other people already expecting it. When I closed the door behind me, I didn't feel relief. I felt alignment. Like my actions had finally caught up to what I'd already accepted internally. Sometimes leaving isn't about anger or revenge. Sometimes it's about refusing to continue being the last person in the room to know the truth. The first few weeks after I left felt strangely calm. Not happy, not sad, just quiet in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. No tension humming in the background, no second-guessing every text, every late reply, every change in tone. For the first time in months, I wasn't bracing myself for emotional impact. I stayed with a friend at first. A spare room, mismatched furniture, no expectations. He didn't ask many questions, which I appreciated. When he did, they were simple ones. "You okay?" And "Want a beer?" Sometimes that's enough. What surprised me most was how quickly life adjusted. My routines changed, but they didn't collapse. I went to work, I worked out, I slept better than I had in a long time. I started noticing small things again, music sounding clearer, food tasting better, conversations feeling lighter. It felt like my nervous system was finally standing down after months of silent alert. Maya reached out occasionally. At first, the messages were long and emotional, apologies mixed with self-analysis, regret tangled up with justifications. She said she was working on herself, that she'd lost perspective, that she finally understood how much damage she'd caused. I believed she was sincere, I just didn't believe it changed anything. Over time, her messages got shorter, then less frequent. Eventually, they stopped altogether. I didn't block her. I didn't need to. Distance does a better job than boundaries sometimes. Friends filled in the gaps. People I hadn't seen much during the relationship reappeared naturally. Dinners, casual hangs, conversations that didn't revolve around emotional repair. No one treated me like I was broken. They treated me like I was back. One night, someone joked, "You seem lighter." I laughed. "Yeah, I think I dropped something heavy." What I dropped wasn't just the relationship. It was the constant self-doubt. I stopped replaying conversations in my head, wondering if I'd missed something obvious. I stopped questioning whether I'd been naive or foolish. I realized something important. Trust isn't stupidity. It's a choice you make in good faith. Someone else abusing it doesn't retroactively make you wrong. That realization felt like reclaiming a part of myself. I ran into Maya once, unexpectedly, at a grocery store. We stood there awkwardly for a moment, carts between us like neutral territory. She looked different. Tired, maybe, or just stripped of the confidence she'd been wearing for so long. She smiled faintly. "You look good." "So do you," I said, meaning it kindly. We didn't talk long. There was nothing left to say that mattered. When we parted, there was no heaviness, just closure that didn't need to be discussed. Walking out of the store, I realized something else. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at her, not at the people who hadn't warned me, not even at myself. Anger had done its job. It got me out. Now there was room for something else. Clarity. And clarity, once it settles in, changes how you build everything that comes after.
Time doesn't fix what happened. It just puts it where it belongs. Months passed, and the story stopped feeling sharp. Not because it wasn't real, but because it was no longer active. I stopped waking up with that tight feeling in my chest. I stopped wondering what people thought when they looked at me. Eventually, I stopped caring. What stayed with me wasn't the image of Maya with Ryan. It was the realization of how alone I'd been before I ever knew. I thought back to all the moments where people could have said something, any small thing. A warning, a question, even a hint. They didn't, because silence was easier, because nobody wanted to be uncomfortable, because it was simpler to assume I was choosing ignorance rather than being denied the truth. That part still stings sometimes, but it also clarified something important. Not everyone who smiles at you is on your side, and not everyone who stays quiet is neutral. I don't hate Maya. That surprises people when I say it. I think she made choices based on avoidance, not cruelty. She wanted comfort, validation, attention, and she wanted it without disruption. I just happened to be the cost she thought she could absorb quietly. She was wrong. I learned a lot about myself through all of this. I learned that being kind doesn't mean staying, that trusting doesn't mean tolerating humiliation, that walking away calmly can be the strongest response you'll ever give. I didn't get closure in a dramatic sense. No perfect conversation, no final apology that wrapped everything up neatly. What I got instead was alignment. My actions finally matched what I knew to be true. I rebuilt my life slowly, intentionally, with better boundaries, with a deeper respect for my own perception. I listen to my instincts now, even when they're inconvenient. Especially then. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone reading this who feels like they're the last to know, it's this. You're not stupid for trusting someone. You're not weak for believing what you were told, and you're not obligated to stay just because everyone else was already watching. Sometimes the most humiliating part isn't the betrayal, it's realizing how long you were alone in it. And sometimes the most freeing moment is deciding you won't be anymore. What would you do in this situation?